There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when food arrives that was cooked by someone who meant it. Not polite silence. Not the silence of people pretending to appreciate something. The other kind. The involuntary kind. The kind that happens when the body receives something the brain hasn't processed yet. When flavor memory and present moment collide, and for 3 full seconds the entire table forgets it exists. Nadia Osei had been chasing that silence for 11 years. She'd caught it exactly 4 times. Once in her grandmother's kitchen in Toronto when she was 16 and added fermented locust bean to a chowder by accident, and her whole family stopped mid-sentence. Once at her culinary school graduation dinner. Once at the James Beard House in New York, at 25. When she was the youngest chef ever invited to cook a solo dinner there. And once, just once, in the tiny supper club she'd run out of a borrowed Williamsburg loft for 8 months before a New Yorker food writer stumbled in on a Thursday and wrote a piece that changed everything. That piece was the reason she was standing in London. Specifically, standing in the kitchen of Ember, her restaurant in Fitzrovia, at 6:45 in the morning, watching her sous chef ruin her suya-spiced lamb reduction and deciding whether or not to say something about it before it was too late. "Kwame," she said. "I know," said Kwame. "The heat." "I know, chef. If the fond burns on the bottom, we can't—" "Nadia." Kwame Asante turned from the stove and pointed his spoon at her with the weary authority of a man who had worked beside her for 3 years and earned the right to point things. He was 28, broad-shouldered, and moved through a kitchen like he'd been grown in one. "I have it. Go do your admin. Go drink something. Go exist in a room that is not my station. Your station is technically my station. Yes. And right now you're standing at it giving me anxiety, which is affecting the reduction, which means if it burns, it's your fault." He turned back to the stove. "Go." She went. She took her coffee to the front of house, the part of Ember she loved most in the empty pre-service hours. And when the morning light came through the tall Fitzrovia windows and hit the dark wood tables and the hanging copper pots, and everything glowed like the inside of a lamp, she'd designed it herself, which her business partner Delia said was a terrible idea, and which was probably right, and which Nadia was never going to acknowledge. Ember had been open 14 months. It had been reviewed, warmly, thoroughly, controversially. And it had been full on weekends since month 3.5, full on weekdays since month 6, which in London's restaurant economy was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The concept was West African European fire cooking, open flames, long fermented things, smoke and char, and the specific ancestral memory that lives in food cooked over heat since before humans had words for what they were doing. It was hers. Entirely, structurally, philosophically hers. Which was why, when her phone lit up on Tuesday morning with a message from a name she didn't recognize, she almost ignored it. "Ms. Osei, my name is Yoon Seojun. I'm reaching out on behalf of my family. We're hosting a private birthday dinner Saturday evening, my mother's 65th. We had a chef arrangement that has fallen through. I was given your name by a mutual contact. I understand this is extremely short notice. I am prepared to compensate accordingly. Please call me at your earliest convenience." She read it twice. The mutual contact, she'd learn later, was the New Yorker food writer. A woman named Patricia Cho, who had never steered Nadia wrong in 4 years and who had texted simultaneously. "Said yes for you already. Trust me." "Call him." She called Patricia first. "Why did you say yes for me?" Nadia asked when Patricia picked up on the second ring. "Because you need to cook for this family." "Patricia. His mother is 65 and she's been in London for 40 years and she misses Korean food cooked with the soul it had when she was young, and you're the only chef I know who can do both things at once." A pause. "Also, Seojin is—" Another pause. "Patricia." He's an interesting person. That is not a sentence that gives me any information. He's a conductor. Nadia stopped. As in, principal conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra. 41. He took over 3 years ago and in 18 months turned them from respectable to transcendent. The Times called him the man who taught the LSO to feel again. Patricia let that land. I thought you'd appreciate the parallel. Nadia looked out through Ember's front windows at the Fitzrovia morning. A conductor. A man whose job was to take 50 discrete instruments and convince them to make one sound. A man who spent his professional life coaxing the extraordinary out of the available. She understood that job in a way that scared her slightly. Saturday, she said. Saturday. That's 4 days. You've done more with less. Patricia, I don't even know what his mother— Call him, Patricia said. He'll tell you everything. He's very thorough. A beat. Thorough is an interesting quality in a person. I'm hanging up. The Times also said he was— She hung up. She called Yoon Seo-jun. His voice, when he answered, was the kind of voice that made you pay attention. Not deep, exactly, but precise. Unhurried. Every word placed where it was supposed to go, the way a musician places notes. She could hear, underneath it, the faint texture of an accent kept partially and deliberately. Ms. Osei, thank you for calling. Mr. Yoon, tell me about your mother. A beat. Surprise, maybe, that she led with that. Her name is Yoon Misuk. She came to London from Busan in 1984 as a postgraduate student and never left. She raised my sister and me here, largely alone. My father passed when we were young. She taught Korean studies at King's College for 30 years. A pause. She turned 65 on Saturday, and I would like to do something that matters to her. Not impressive. Significant. Those are different things, Nadia said. Yes, they are. What does your mother love to eat? Another beat. She was starting to understand that his pauses were not uncertainty. They were precision. He paused when something deserved more than an automatic answer. She makes doenjang-jjigae every Sunday. Has since before I can remember. She says it's the only thing that makes London feel like home. His voice changed slightly. Quieter. More internal. She doesn't complain about anything. About being here. About what she gave up. About being far from family. But every Sunday that smell comes out of her kitchen, and I know, I've always known, that it's the one honest thing. The one thing she can't perform contentment at. Nadia's pen had stopped moving on her notepad. She knew that smell. Not doenjang, but the principle of it. The way a smell could be a whole unspoken autobiography. Her own grandmother's kitchen, palm oil and crayfish and the low simmer of a pot that had been going since before you woke up. The smell of being known. I can work with that, she said quietly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I need to build your mother a bridge, Nadia said. Between what she misses and where she's been for 40 years. Between her kitchen and mine. She paused. I need 3 days and your mother's favorite childhood memories. Can you get me those? Silence. Then. I can get you those. And Mr. Yoon. Seojun. Please. Seojun. His name felt unusual in her mouth, specific and unhurried like the way he spoke. Don't tell your mother I'm coming. Let the food be the introduction. A pause. This one longer. When he spoke, his voice had changed again. Something warmer underneath the precision. Something like relief. I'll have everything to you by Thursday morning. What arrived Thursday morning was not a list. It was a letter. 4 pages, handwritten in careful English, from a man who had spent his entire professional life in the language of music and apparently carried that precision into everything else. He wrote about his mother's hands, how she'd learned to cook from her own mother in Busan, standing on a step stool to reach the counter. He wrote about the first meal she made them in London, in their Clapham flat, on a camping stove because the hob was broken, and how the steam from the pot had fogged every window and made the flat feel warm for the first time. He wrote about the specific doenjang she ordered from a Korean grocery in New Cross because it was the only brand that tasted right. He wrote about her birthday tradition. Always a miyeokguk, seaweed soup, the Korean birthday standard, simple and ancient and full of the particular love that doesn't need to perform itself. At the bottom of the last page, in smaller writing, almost an afterthought, she used to sing while she cooked. She doesn't anymore. I've been trying to understand for 20 years what the cooking and the singing had in common. I think they were the same act. I think she stopped believing anyone was listening. Nadia read that line 3 times. Then she called her best friend. Simone answered on the first ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she was already in the middle of an opinion. Simone Delacroix operated on a personal schedule that had nothing to do with conventional hours and everything to do with when her thoughts were loudest. "Okay, so I've been thinking," Simone said, without preamble. "Good morning to you too." "It's 10:30. That's not morning, that's practically lunch." Simone was a textile designer based in Peckham, half Martiniquais, entirely chaotic, and the only person Nadia had ever met who could be more intense about her own work than Nadia was about food. They'd been friends since culinary school orientation, where Simone had appeared, inexplicably, as someone's plus one and never left. "I've been thinking about your dinner situation. I just told you about it yesterday." "I know. I've had time to have thoughts." The sound of Simone walking somewhere rapidly. "This conductor. He wrote you a letter." "Nadia. He sent me information about the client." "He sent you a handwritten letter about his mother's soul." A pause for emphasis. Men do not do that. Men text. Men send bullet points. Men send a voice note where they trail off at the end and it tells you nothing. This man sent you a letter. This is a professional relationship, Simone? Fine. A professional relationship with a man who describes his mother's cooking in terms of honesty and performance. A man who used the phrase, "the one thing she can't perform contentment at." Simone's voice dropped into its knowing register. "Nadia, baby, that man is an artist. He conducts orchestras, so yes, technically. I'm not talking about his job. I'm talking about how his brain works." A beat. "Are you nervous about Saturday?" "I'm focused on Saturday." "Those are the same thing for you." "Simone. What are you going to cook her?" And Nadia told her. While she talked, pacing her apartment with the letter still in her hand, the dish assembled itself in her mind the way they always did. Not designed, but discovered, the way you find something that was there all along under the wrong light. The doenjang base, long fermented and complex. Her grandmother's palm nut reduction, slow cooked until it had the density of something ancient. Short rib, braised 24 hours. The smoke of ember. Her fire. Her signature. Running through all of it. And the miyeokguk. His mother's birthday soup. Not replaced. Answered. A version of it that carried the traditional seaweed and anchovy stock, but finished with a smoked bone broth that tasted like every kitchen that had ever fed someone who was far from home. "Nadia," Simone said, when she'd finished explaining. "What?" "That dish is going to make that woman cry. That's the goal. That dish is also going to make that man look at you in a way that is going to complicate your life considerably." "Goodbye, Simone. I'm just saying. When food tells the truth, the person who made it becomes very—" She hung up. She stood in her kitchen. The morning light through her Hackney flat window was the color of fire about to catch, amber at the edges, warm at the core. She thought about a woman in a Clapham flat in 1984, fogging up windows with steam from a pot on a camping stove, making her kitchen feel like home in a country that was not yet home. She thought about a man who had been listening for 20 years to a silence where singing used to be. I think they were the same act. The cooking and the singing, the offering, the reaching toward someone with everything you have, hoping they receive it. She picked up her pen. She started writing the recipe. She met Seojin Yoon in person on Friday afternoon at the Mayfair townhouse where the dinner would be held, a property belonging to his mother's oldest London friend, borrowed for the occasion, with a kitchen that turned out to be, by some grace, genuinely professional. She was already in the kitchen, doing a walkthrough of the equipment, when she heard the front door. He was taller than she'd assembled from his voice. 6 feet, lean with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades standing before an audience and learned that how you hold your body is a message. Late 30s or early 40s, in a dark gray overcoat, black scarf, Korean features, sharp and composed. He moved through the house without hesitation, like he'd memorized the floor plan, and appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. She had palm nut oil on her forearm and a fermented doenjang container open on the counter beside her, and the entire space already smelled, powerfully, like the collision of 2 continents. "Miss Osei," he said. "Chef Osei is fine." She didn't look up from her notes. "The oven in the far corner runs 15 degrees hot. The extraction fan is louder than it should be, which means I'll be directing my team mostly by gesture during critical moments, which is fine, but I need you to know that." She looked up. "And there's no salamander, which I already knew, but I want to confirm you're aware that the finishing on some dishes will be done with a hand torch, which is slightly theatrical, but controlled fire," he said. Something in her paused. "Yes. You cook over open flame at Ember?" "I do." "The name," he said. "It's specifically chosen, not flame, not fire. Ember." He looked at the room with the focused attention she was starting to recognize as his default mode. Nothing decorative about his gaze, everything considered. An ember is what's left when the fire has done its work, the heat without the spectacle. She looked at him for a moment. Nobody had ever said that to her. Not in the 14 months since she'd named the restaurant. Not in the dozens of interviews she'd done explaining the concept. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." He nodded. Once. Satisfied, like a man filing information correctly. "May I see the menu?" She handed it to him. He read it standing up. She watched his face the way she always watched faces encountering something she'd made. The restaurant industry version of holding your breath. His expression was careful and contained, the face of someone who had trained themselves not to react before they were ready. But when he reached the 3rd course, the doenjang-and-palm-nut braised short rib, something shifted. Small. Involuntary. A stillness that was different from his resting stillness. "This," he said. "Yes." "The doenjang reduction with the palm nut emulsion." Her kitchen and mine, in conversation. He looked up. "Have you made this before?" "No. But I've been rehearsing it in my head for 2 days." She held his gaze. "A conductor builds an interpretation before the orchestra plays it. The performance is the proof of the interpretation, not the origin of it." He was very still. Then, "That's exactly right." "I know." She picked her pen back up. "I need to ask you something about your mother's doenjang, the brand she uses from New Cross. Haechandul, the one in the dark brown container. I couldn't source it through my usual supplier. Can you get me 2 containers by 9 a.m. tomorrow?" He pulled out his phone without hesitation. "Done. And a particular variety of dried miok. The thick-cut kind, not the shredded. Your letter mentioned her birthday soup." "I'll bring both." He was already texting someone. "What else?" "That's it for sourcing." She looked at the rest of her notes. "For tomorrow. My sous chef Kwame arrives at noon. I need the house from 2 p.m. for full prep. Guests arrive at 7? 7:30. 30 guests. Mostly Korean. Family. Are her colleagues from King's, some old friends. My sister will be there with her husband and their 2 children. He paused. My mother's sister is flying in from Seoul. Aunt Bora. Should I be nervous about Aunt Bora? Something happened to his face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. Like the shadow of a smile that had existed somewhere nearby. She once wrote a letter to a Seoul restaurant demanding they rename a dish because it was etymologically incorrect. Nadia stared at him. She wrote a letter. 3 pages. Handwritten. Runs in the family, apparently. He looked at her for a moment. And there it was. The actual smile, arrived late and therefore more interesting. Not wide, controlled even in its warmth, but real, completely real. She'll ask where you're from within the first 10 minutes. I'm from Toronto via London via everywhere in between. None of that is classified. She'll ask about the food. Good. I like people who ask about the food. Nadia capped her pen. Tell me about your mother's face when she eats something she loves. I need to know what I'm cooking toward. The smile disappeared, replaced by something less defended. He looked at the countertop for a moment. When I was 9, he said, she made doenjang-and-palm-nut on Christmas Day. We didn't celebrate Christmas, not really. But my school friends did, and she knew I was aware of what we weren't doing. So she made the soup. She put it in front of me and she said, this is older than any holiday. This is ours. And she had this. He stopped. There's a word in Korean. Han. It's untranslatable, really. It's grief and longing and love and endurance all compressed into one feeling. When she eats food that carries that feeling, he paused. She goes very still. And her hands stop moving. And for a moment she's completely present in a way that she usually isn't. He looked up. She works very hard, my mother. Her mind is always 3 places at once, but food does that to her. It stops her. Nadia was writing. Not the recipe. Something else. Han. Grief and longing and love and endurance. She wrote it at the top of her prep notes, where she could see it during service. Okay, she said. I know what I'm making. You didn't know before? I had the architecture, now I have the feeling. She looked at him. Those are different things. He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than necessary. I know, he said. They are. Kwame arrived Saturday at noon and immediately walked into the kitchen, assessed the space, assessed the menu, and said, the doenjang-and-palm-nut thing? Walk me through it. We're making it exactly as I told you. I know what you told me. I want to understand the logic of it. He crossed his arms. Because on paper it shouldn't work. Most things that work didn't work on paper first. She started the mise en place. The doenjang is a fermented soybean paste, deeply umami, slightly funky, very Korean. The palm nut reduction is rich, slightly sweet, smoky from our fire cook. Very West African. Both come from fermentation traditions. Both are built on patience and time, and something transforming into something else. She began breaking down the short rib. They share a flavor grammar even though they speak different languages. Kwame was quiet for a moment. Then, like 2 musicians who've never met playing the same chord. She looked at him. Exactly like that. She pointed at him. Go start the bone broth. Already started it when you were talking. He moved to the back station without looking up. The conductor. Is he coming by before guests arrive? He's dropping ingredients at 9 a.m. He's been and gone. Patricia said he was. I will not be discussing the client with my sous chef. She said he was interesting. Patricia says everyone interesting is interesting. It's her only consistent character flaw. Kwame stirred his broth. She doesn't say that about just anyone. Kwame. I'm just here making stock and having thoughts. Have fewer of them. He grinned. She turned back to her short rib. Outside, London's February sky was doing its typical thing, gray and dramatic, the light filtered and theatrical, the kind of light that made everything look like it was being filmed. She thought about fire. She thought about what it meant to cook for someone who had stopped believing anyone was listening. She thought about the letter. She picked up her knife and started cooking. Seojun came back at 4. Not to check on anything? Or that's what he said. He stood in the kitchen doorway in a dark suit now, jacket on, ready for his guests, but still 2 hours early, and watched her work with the attentiveness of a man who was not watching food being prepared, but watching something else happen that food was involved in. She was searing the short ribs. Proper sear. The fat rendering first, then the Maillard reaction turning the surface to deep mahogany, the sound and smell filling the entire kitchen with something that demanded you stop and pay attention. My mother would say, he said, from the doorway, that the searing is where the cook puts their character in. Your mother's right. Nadia turned the rib. You can't fake the sear. Either you have the patience for the right heat and the right time, or you don't. He came in, not presumptuous. Nothing about him was presumptuous. He moved through spaces like he was always aware of whose space it was, and stood at the counter opposite her station. Not in her way. Present. The letter, he said. I wasn't sure it was the right approach. It was. Patricia said you needed the story, not the specifications. Patricia is almost always right, which is annoying. Nadia checked the fond. The part about the singing. She didn't look up. When did she stop? He was quiet for a moment. The year my father died. I was 12. A pause. She cooked more after. She was in the kitchen every evening, elaborate meals she didn't need to make. But the singing was gone. A beat. I used to think she stopped because she was grieving. Now I think she stopped because she started cooking for survival instead of for the other thing, the real thing. The kitchen smelled of fire and fermentation and the long patience of things transforming. What was the other thing? Nadia asked. He considered. Joy, he said. Or, no, joy isn't quite right. Abundance. She cooked like she had something in excess, and cooking was how she spent it. Nadia turned to the last rib. Her hands were steady and certain, the way they always were when she was in her element, when the kitchen stopped being a room and started being an extension of her. That's the truest thing I've heard all week, she said. He looked at her in the way that was becoming familiar. The full attention. Nothing performed about it. How did you decide on this? He said. Cooking. Over everything else. My grandmother, she said. I was 8. She made palm-nut soup and she gave me a spoon, and she said, her exact words. The food is the argument. You want to tell someone you love them, cook something true. Everything else is just talking. Nadia pulled the ribs to rest. I've never found a better argument. He was quiet. The kitchen was loud with all the sounds of cooking, the stock simmering, the extraction fan, the soft percussion of her hands. But the silence between them had a different quality. The quality of two people who have said something real and are letting it exist in the air. She sounds like my mother, he said. I think, Nadia said, they would be best friends or complete enemies, with nothing in between. The almost smile, warmer than the last one. You said something similar about your grandmother, with Patricia. She looked at him. Patricia told you what I said? She texts extensively. A beat. She also told me you were going to make something remarkable and that I should pay attention. She says that about everyone. She also said... He stopped. What? She said, Nadia Osi cooks like she's writing letters to everyone she's ever loved, Make sure you're paying attention when you read it. The kitchen was warm. She was aware of the warmth specifically, the way you become aware of a temperature when it changes. That's... She turned back to the stove. I'm going to have to talk to Patricia about oversharing. It's not oversharing if it's accurate. A beat. Is it? She didn't answer. But she didn't say no. The escalation arrived at 5:30, in the form of her phone ringing with a number she recognized and did not want to see. Gerard Maillet, her business partner and primary investor in Ember. She stepped out of the kitchen to take it. Gerard. Nadia. His voice had the particular French precision of a man who chose his entrances carefully. I've been speaking with the board. There's something we need to discuss. She knew what it was, had known for 3 weeks, since the board meeting where Gerard had raised the question of Ember's second location, specifically, his vision for it. Paris. A more traditional French West African fusion concept, nothing like Ember's fire-forward, deeply personal cooking, a concept designed for broader palatability and therefore broader profit. You're going to tell me about Paris, she said. The opportunity is significant. The space in Le Marais. That space is built for a different restaurant than mine. Nadia. A pause. Your concept is extraordinary in London. It may not... In Paris, the market requires... My market requires the food to be true. That's the only requirement I cook to. The investors... Gerard? She kept her voice steady. She had learned, working in kitchens since she was 17, that steadiness was its own power. That you could burn hot without burning loud. I'm in the middle of a private booking. Can we have this conversation Monday? A pause. There's a dinner Tuesday. The investors want to discuss the Paris expansion and the creative direction going forward. He hesitated. There's a proposal on the table, Nadia, for bringing in a co-chef, someone with existing Paris market presence. She said nothing. Someone who would share the menu curation. Gerard. Her voice now was very quiet. The fire before the heat becomes visible. Is this conversation about Paris, or is it about my creative control? A long pause. Monday, he said. Let's discuss on Monday. He hung up. She stood in the Mayfair hallway, which was beautiful and warm and full of the smell of everything she was building 10 meters away in that kitchen. A co-chef, someone to sand down the edges of her cooking, to make it more accessible, which in restaurant business language meant less like her. She had built Ember to cook without compromise. She had not crossed an ocean to have herself. She went back into the kitchen. Kwame looked at her face. He had known her for 3 years, and he could read her the way she read a stove, by the heat it was putting out. The Gerard call, he said. After service, she said. He nodded. He passed her a spoon. Taste the broth. She tasted the broth. It was extraordinary. Smoke and sea and the deep, slow truth of bones that had been coaxed for 6 hours into saying everything they knew. More salt, she said. Obviously, he said. But he was watching her face. It's going to be fine, Nadia. It's not fine yet. No, he said. It's not. But the food is. She picked up her knife. That at least was true. Guests arrived at 7:30. Nadia could hear them from the kitchen, the particular sound of a family gathering, multilingual and warm, the overlap of Korean and English, and the laughter of children and the specific register of an older woman's voice holding everything together. That voice was Yoon Mi-suk. Even through a wall and a door, Nadia knew which voice was hers. The first 2 courses went out on time. The jeon, Korean savory pancakes, her version, with a Ghanaian kelewele spice in the batter and a dipping sauce of doenjang thinned with tamarind, came back with empty plates and, from the sound of it, a table that had become significantly more animated. They're talking about the John, Kwame said. cocking an ear toward the dining room. I know. I can hear someone saying Maiwo, but in a good way. I know. Kwam. The children are going to want more of the John. I already made extra. Stop listening through walls and plate the second course. The second course went out. The room quieted. The specific positive quiet of concentration. And then, at the turn to the third course, the doenjang-and-palm-nut short rib. Aunt Bora came into the kitchen. She was 67 and had the structural authority of someone who had never once in her life been ignored without consequences. Silver hair, immaculate hanbok-inspired blouse, the expression of a senior academic who has opinions about everything and has decided tonight was an appropriate venue for them. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at Nadia. She looked at the pot with the palm nut reduction. "What is that smell?" she said in Korean, and which Nadia partially understood from 6 months of Duolingo and a more genuine effort sparked by the Seojun conversation. Doenjang-and-palm-nut, Nadia said carefully in Korean. They're related. Fermentation cousins. Aunt Bora blinked. In Korean, at the same careful pace as Nadia. You speak Korean. A little. Enough to explain the food. Nadia held her gaze. The short rib has been braising since yesterday morning. The emulsion took 4 hours. It won't taste like anything your sister has had before, but it will taste like something she remembers. Aunt Bora was quiet. Her eyes moved around the kitchen with the comprehensive attention of someone who is reading the room the way a scholar reads a text. She looked at the mise en place. Everything labeled. Everything precise. She looked at Kwame, who gave her a nod of professional solidarity. She looked at the handwritten recipe notes pinned above the station, and at the top, visible from 3 feet away, Hanka, grief and longing and love and endurance. She looked at Nadia. My sister stopped singing when her husband died, Aunt Bora said. I have not heard her sing in 28 years. Nadia looked at her steadily. I know. You know. Seojun told me, in his letter. A pause. I cooked toward it. Aunt Bora's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, if it's too salty, I will tell you. Please do. She left. Was that? Kwame started. We passed. Nadia went back to the stove. Plate the short rib. Nadia carried the first plate herself. Always, for the dish that mattered most. Protocol was one thing, but some food had to be delivered by the hands that made it. The dining room was exactly as she'd heard it. Warm, full, the low amber light of candles and wall sconces, a table of 30 that had relaxed into itself over 2 courses and was now present and expectant. She moved along the table, Kwame and their runner behind her, placing plates. She placed Yoon Misuk's last. She had not planned to look. She had planned to set the plate, straighten, step back, the professional retreat. But she looked. Misuk was exactly who her son's letter had described, small and upright, with silver hair worn simply, and eyes that were the eyes of a woman who had paid close attention to everything for 65 years. She had her children's attention on one side and her sister's hand on her arm on the other. She looked at the plate. The room was already quieting, not because they'd been asked to, but because this dish arriving had changed the air in the room. Misuk looked at the plate for a long moment. She looked up at Nadia. She spoke in Korean. Seojun, who had been standing at the far end of the table, translated, quietly, without moving, just his voice carrying across the room. She asks, "What is this called?" Nadia answered in the careful Korean she'd been rehearsing in the prep kitchen since Friday. Not perfect. She had an accent she knew, and her tones were approximate in places. But real. Genuinely, effortfully real. I don't have a name for it yet. It's the first time I've cooked it for anyone. The table was very quiet. Misuk picked up her spoon. She tasted the miyakguk variation first, her birthday soup, answered. Then the short rib, the emulsion coating the spoon with its amber dark gleam. The expression that moved across her face was exactly what Seojun had described, and also something else entirely. Something that couldn't be predicted or scripted or cooked toward, that arrived from the inside of a person when they received something they didn't know they were waiting for. Her hands stopped moving. Her eyes filled. She did not cry. She was Yoon Mi-suk, 65 years of composure, and she was not going to cry at her own birthday table. But her eyes filled, and her hands stopped, and her whole body went still in the way that her son had described, the kind of present that only certain food creates. And every Korean guest at that table went silent. Aunt Bora had her hand over her mouth. The two children, Seojun's sister's kids, 8 and 5, were the only ones who kept moving, reaching for the bread course. And somehow their ordinary hunger was the most heart-cracking thing in the room. Then Misuk looked at Nadia, and she said something. Seojun's voice from the end of the table, quieter than before, and not quite steady. She says, "It tastes like the Sunday I realized London was home." The silence held for one more breath. Then Aunt Bora said, in a voice that had also lost some of its architecture, "Still slightly salty?" And the table laughed. The sudden, released laughter of people who needed to exhale. And Misuk laughed too. The full, warm laugh of a woman who was, for the first time in the evening, completely herself. From the back of the room, barely audible, Seojun breathed out. Nadia retreated to the kitchen. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the cool stainless steel, and she just breathed. Kwame appeared beside her with 2 glasses of water. He said nothing. That was exactly right. After dessert, after the birthday song in 3 languages, after the cake, made by Seojun's sister, carried in with tremendous gravity by the 8-year-old who treated this task with the solemn importance of a state function. After the guests began moving to the sitting room, Nadia was in the kitchen breaking down her station. Gerard Mailly called again. She stared at the screen. She thought about what waited on the other end of it. The Paris proposal, the co-chef, the gentle erosion of everything she had built by not accommodating herself to a market. She thought about the board meeting Tuesday. She thought about what it would mean to cook with someone else's vision threaded through her food. She declined the call. She would fight that fight. She knew how to fight it. She'd been fighting versions of it her entire career, the fight to cook her food in her way with her fire. And she had won enough rounds to know she could win more. She had lawyers. She had the contract language. She had 14 months of proof that her concept worked. But that fight was for Monday. Tonight she cleaned her station and listened to the sounds of a family in the next room. He found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later. He came in quietly, still in his suit jacket, and stood at the counter. He looked different than he had at any point in the 3 days she'd known him. The composed architecture of him partially down, like a score performed at tempo, the control and the feeling showing at once. "She wants to meet you," he said. "I'll come out." Before that. He stopped. He looked at the counter, then back at her. The conductor's precision was still there, but the timing was different. Slower, like something being played rubato, the way classical musicians call a passage that breathes outside the strict beat. "My mother asked me what I knew about you. I told her about Toronto and London and Ember, about the James Beard dinner, about the fire cooking." A pause. "She asked if I'd met you before arranging this dinner." "What did you say?" "I said I'd spoken to you on the phone and in person once." He met her eyes. She said, "That's not what I asked." Nadia looked at him. "My mother," he said, "has been reading people for 65 years. She reads a room the way I read a score. She sees the structure underneath the surface." A beat. "She asked me what I thought of you." "What did you tell her?" He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm. The extraction fan had finally, mercifully, stopped. The only sound was the low simmer of the remaining stock, and outside the windows, faint London, the city doing its perpetual thing, alive and indifferent and magnificent. I told her, he said carefully, that you were the first person I'd met in a very long time who I wanted to keep talking to. The stock simmered. That's a very controlled thing to say, Nadia said. I'm a very controlled person. I know. A pause. What's the uncontrolled version? He looked at her. Something shifted. The same involuntary thing she'd seen when he read the menu in the kitchen on Friday. The response before the management catches up. The uncontrolled version is that I've been conducting orchestras for 17 years, and the thing I spend my life looking for, the point where 50 different voices stop being separate and become one thing. I thought it only happened in music. He paused. When your food arrived tonight, the table went silent. Yes, but not silent like. He stopped. In music, there's a rest that is not an absence. It's the breath the music takes before the next phrase begins. It's the most intentional silence in the score. He looked at her steadily. That's what happened at my mother's table. Not absence. Intention. You created a rest, and I don't know how to hear that and then pretend I didn't. The kitchen was very warm. I have a business problem, she said, which was not what she intended to say. He waited. My investor. He wants to dilute the concept, bring in a co-chef, expand in a direction that makes the food more. She stopped. Less. He wants it more palatable, which is a word people use when they mean less true. She looked at her hands. I have a board meeting Tuesday, and I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to win, because I have the contracts and the track record, and I know my food is right. But it costs something. Every time. The fire, he said. She looked at him. It costs fire, he said. Every time you have to defend the truth of what you make, it costs some of the heat that made it true. He paused. I know that cost. The first year with the LSO, there were board members who wanted me to program more accessible repertoire, less difficult pieces, more predictable. He was quiet. I programmed what I believed was right, and I lost 3 board members. But the orchestra started to play differently. Because they knew I wasn't managing them. I was trusting them. Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Your investors might come around, he said. They might. And if they don't, then I'll find different investors. She said it simply. Without drama. Because it was simply, without drama, true. The fire doesn't go out because someone tries to blow it out. It adjusts. He smiled. Not the small one. The full version, unhurried and unguarded, and it transformed him the way a fortissimo transforms a piano piece that has been quiet too long. Come meet my mother, he said. Yoon Mi-suk was in the sitting room, her shoes off, her silver hair slightly looser than at the start of the evening, surrounded by the specific warmth of a family that had been fed and was now fully at ease. Her grandchildren were asleep against her, one on each side, with the boneless relaxation of children who had been allowed to stay up too late and were paying for it in real time. She looked up when Nadia came in. She looked at her for a moment, the full, comprehensive look that her son had clearly inherited. And then she said something in Korean. Seojun beside Nadia. She says, sit down, you've been standing all evening. Nadia sat. Mi-suk said something else. She says, tell me about your grandmother. So Nadia told her. In English, with Seojun translating quietly at intervals. She told Mi-suk about her grandmother's kitchen in Toronto, the wooden spoon she'd used for 40 years, the specific smell of palm oil heating in the morning, the Saturday market runs, the way she'd learned to cook by watching hands rather than reading recipes. She told her about the argument. The food is the argument. And she watched Misuk's face as the words arrived. Misuk listened with the stillness she'd had over the short rib. Present. Fully. Intentionally present. When Nadia finished, Misuk was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and Seojun translated in a voice that had the rubato quality again. The breathing outside the strict beat. She says, "My mother also had a wooden spoon. She used it for everything. Cooking and threatening us when we were badly behaved. We buried it with her. She says," a pause. "She says she would like to come to your restaurant." Nadia felt something warm move through her chest. Ember would be honored. Misuk smiled. Then she said one more thing, and Seojun was quiet for a moment before translating. She says, "The food tasted like something I'd been waiting to eat for 40 years without knowing it. Like coming home through a door I'd never used before." Nadia sat with that for a moment. The fire metaphor, she thought. You don't always see it coming. Sometimes the ember you've been tending suddenly, without warning, becomes the room. "Tell her," Nadia said carefully, "that she can have the recipe. When I've written it properly." Misuk looked at her. A long look. The look of someone who has seen through something and approved of what's underneath. She said something short. Seojin translated. His voice was very quiet. She says, "Some recipes should only be made by the person who invented them." Nadia was putting her kit into the van at midnight when Seojin came out of the house. Kwame had gone ahead. The caterer's van was idling. London was doing its midnight thing. The city still awake, a bus going past, someone laughing 2 streets over, the cold air carrying a distant siren and the closer smell of rain about to happen. He was in his overcoat and he was not performing anything. The composure was there, but it was the composure of someone who has put down something heavy and found the real thing underneath. "The board meeting Tuesday," he said. "I can handle the board meeting." "I know you can." A beat. "I know someone at Gerard's investment group. We've worked together on cultural funding projects. He respects Ember's concept. He told me so directly, at an industry dinner 6 weeks ago." He paused. "I can make a call Monday morning." She looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He met her eyes. "I want to." She held his gaze. The van idled. The rain began. Light. London rain. The kind that doesn't announce itself. Just quietly begins. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The precise, weighted silence of a man making sure what he says is what he means. "Because what you do is worth protecting. Because the cooking you brought tonight was the truest thing I've been in the presence of in..." A stop. "In a long time." A breath. "And because I have spent 17 years learning that when something extraordinary comes into a room, and the correct response is to do everything in your power to make sure it keeps playing." The rain was gentle on her shoulders. The van was warm. "I'm going to call you," she said. "On Monday. About the board meeting." "I know. And after the board meeting." He looked at her. "And probably after that," she said. The slow smile arrived. Fully this time. Not controlled, not calibrated, just real, just warm. The smile of a man who has been waiting for a particular note and has finally heard it played correctly. "I'll answer," he said. She got in the van. As it pulled away, she looked back through the rear window at the Mayfair townhouse, the warm light in the upstairs windows, the street going quiet. She thought about a woman in a Clapham flat in 1984, fogging up windows with a cooking pot on a camping stove. She thought about a 12-year-old boy listening to a kitchen that had gone quiet. She thought about fire, the ember of something that keeps its heat long after the flame has calmed. The next Saturday, she was at Ember at 6:45 a.m., exactly as she always was. The light came through the tall Fitzrovia windows the way it always did. The ember-colored light of morning, amber at the edges. The copper pots caught it. The dark wood tables gleamed. But the board meeting had happened Tuesday, and she had walked in wearing her chef's whites. Not because it was protocol, but because she was going to walk into that room exactly as herself. And she had laid the contracts on the table and the track record and the 14 months of proof. And when Gerard had started to speak about the co-chef, she had said, quietly and without drama, "The creative vision of Ember is non-negotiable. If the board cannot support that vision, I will find a board that can. I have interest from 3 parties who believe in this concept without reservation." She had not had 3 parties. She had had one. The call Seo-jun had made on Monday morning, which had resulted in a conversation, which had resulted in a letter of interest from a cultural investment group that respected exactly the kind of cooking she did. One letter. But it was enough. Gerard had looked at her for a long moment. He had said, "The Paris proposal is tabled." She had said, "Thank you." She had meant it without triumph, which was the better kind of winning. Now she stood in her kitchen in the amber morning, and Kwame came in at 7 and said, "The doenjang-and-palm-nut short rib. And are we putting it on the menu?" And she said, "We're developing it for the spring menu. I want 6 more test versions before it's permanent." And Kwame said, "I'll order the palm nuts." And she said, "Already ordered?" And he said, "Obviously." And they worked. At 8:15, her phone lit up with a message. "My mother cooked this morning. She made doenjang jjigae." I was in the next room and I heard a pause in the message. She could feel it. The weight of what came next. The man taking the time to find the right word. I heard her singing. Nadia stood at her station in the ember-colored morning light of Ember, her kitchen, her fire, her fight, and her joy, and her whole entire argument. And she read that message twice. She thought about what it meant to cook something into existence that wasn't there before. The act of it, the fire of it. Not the flame, the ember. The heat without the spectacle. The thing that stays warm long after the cooking is done, that warms a room it's not even in anymore, that reaches through a wall between 2 kitchens. A Clapham kitchen and a Busan memory, and a Toronto grandmother and a Fitzrovia morning. And makes someone sing. She typed back, "Tell her I'm glad." Then, after a moment, she typed, "Tell her the recipe has a name now." "What is it?" Came back. Immediately. He had been waiting. She smiled. She looked at her kitchen, the copper and the flame and the morning and the whole magnificent, improbable, true thing she had built. She typed, "The Sunday I realized London was home." She set her phone down and picked up her knife. Outside, London was waking up. The fire was burning exactly as it should. Not spectacle, not performance. Not accommodation to anything except the truth. An ember, after all, does not diminish. It just learns to warm the right room.